panelists for joining us. Now, those of you who were here earlier, you probably saw the pastors panel, which was for pastors, and it was a riot. It was very fun to watch. A lot of good back and forth there. But there was a whole lot of agreement. I don't expect that to necessarily be the case today, because we have a wide range of politically minded and or candidates for politics coming in here today. So let's start, and if you would, just give a brief 30-second or so introduction of yourself, starting with Mr. Michael Johns.
Hey, JD, how are you?
I'm great.
Pleasure to be with you guys, all of you Patriots. Love you. Yeah,
absolutely. Michael, tell us a little bit about your history. Give us about the 30-second version.
I have been active in politics and public policy for over 30 years. I started at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. for 5 years. I worked for the governor, a senator. I was a White House speechwriter, President George H.W. Bush. I was a co-founder, leader, and spokesperson within our Tea Party movement, and have, largely defined myself as a centrist conservative for most of my, adult life. Importantly, I endorsed Donald Trump on day one of his candidacy, and I'm hugely supportive of the president and his administration.
Very good, very good. Mindy Robinson, tell us about you.
Hi, my name is Mindy Robinson. I'm a political commentator. I do acting. I've done a lot of military movies, that kind of stuff. And I started commenting on politics a few years ago. And instead of just complaining about the Democrats online, I actually decided to do something about it. So I'm currently running for Congress in Southern Nevada. So it's all of Southern Nevada where I live, and pretty much where everyone I know lives. And it's a Trump voting district. And we currently have a Democrat that voted for impeachment. She wants to ban assault rifles. She's Planned Parenthood money. I don't know how I can tell you how she didn't, how she won, but obviously there's a lot of voter fraud here. So I jumped into the race, and I want to make Nevada red again. This is a very patriotic state, very good people, a lot of independents, libertarians, Republicans, and a lot of people in between. And we like our freedom. We like our guns. It's a very American state, and I want to make it red again. I think that's my main cause.
Excellent. Speaking of making it red again, Mr. Buzz Patterson, tell us how you're going to make at least one congressional district in California red again too.
Well, yeah, I'm Buzz Patterson, Air Force combat pilot. Did 20 years in the Air Force, saw duty around the world. And 1996, 1998, I was President Bill Clinton's military aide, Air Force military aide, and carried the nuclear football. I retired from the Air Force in 2001, started writing political books about how politics negatively impacts our military, especially when it's Democratic politics. And I'm like Mindy, I'm running as well. I'm running in California 7, which is Sacramento. It's a very flippable district. It used to be Republican for decades, and they redrew the lines a little bit and got this guy named Ami Bera in there. He's been there for 8 years. He votes with Pelosi 100% of the time. He's a Pelosi acolyte. He voted for impeachment also, Mindy. And he swore to his constituents he wouldn't do that unless it was bipartisan. So we knew how that turned out. So that's who I am. And yes, I'm running for Congress as well.
Excellent. Great panel. And again, a very wide range here. I would say I'm probably the radical right winger who wants to limit government by about 80%. Then you've got Michael, who is the pragmatist, the right of center person who helped start the Tea Party. And I think we're going to get to see where Buzz and Mindy fall into this spectrum today. So let's start off with an easy question, and this is a question for everybody. Should America open up soon or now, and how do you do it? Let's start with Michael.
Well, we have 50 states and District of Columbia and territories in this country, and each one of them faces a different level of threat as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you're in New York State, where over 40% of these cases are, it's very prevalent. There's a great degree of risk. There's a great probability that if you're neglecting the guidelines there, that you could in fact become sick and your life threatened. And then there's many states, really even almost a lion's share of them, where the pandemic is modest or even minor threat to health. So I really think ultimately the federalist instinct of letting governors and state governments make these determinations and be held accountable for them, and to make those decisions based on the data, the evidence, the public health guidance that they're receiving in those respective states is the way to do it. And that might be one question that has 50 plus different answers.
Literally 50 or 51 if you count Puerto Rico. Buzz, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think it depends on where you're at. California's done a great job so far. I mean, Gavin Newsom surprisingly has done a decent job, but now he's trying to postpone the opening. And where I live, we've only had a handful of deaths. We've had less deaths than we have from the flu. I think that it's time to get back to work. I have a lot of small business owners in my district, and they are screaming that they're not going to be able to come out the other side of this with their businesses, and they're not getting the help as quickly as they need it. So I am hoping that we can get back to business sooner than later. And I think what's really kind of reassuring to see what's happening in LA and in San Diego and Orange County, people hitting the streets, much like Michael and much like the Tea Party. This could be Tea Party 2020, and I think it probably will be. And I think that the longer this goes on, the more unrest we're going to have. And we've got to do it smartly, obviously, intelligently. But I think in places in California, like where I'm running, we've got a lot of open space, a lot of ranches, a lot of farmers that can't go anywhere. And that doesn't seem to be very smart either. So I think we need to do it like New York and New Jersey. There's one situation. Big states like Nevada, California, I think it's a wholly different situation. And I applaud President Trump for trying to get this back up and running. And I hope we're all back up and running by May 1st.
Absolutely. Mindy, how do we do this?
Well, you have to start from the beginning. I mean, we saw communist China locking people up into their apartments. These apartments were falling down. And we were like, are they feeding these people? They're arresting journalists. It looked terrifying. I mean, it looked like they released like airborne AIDS. And like, what did they do? They obviously did something, and obviously people were scared. I was concerned. It's communism. And I realized, I think, after you see it hit other countries, like America and stuff, you realize it was probably a bad healthcare system. It's socialist healthcare. It's marginal on a good day. Of course, it can't handle anything major. So we have that coming. I understand why people didn't want that to happen here. I mean, but I don't understand. I think a lot of people are with me on this. Why the quarantine, number one, wasn't voluntary only, and why it only didn't apply to the sick, the elderly, those at risk, those that are pregnant, those that have autoimmune diseases, and those that live and take care of them. It should have applied to them. And the rest of us, like we always do, should have went to work, should have kept those businesses open. I would have covered for my friends if they couldn't. Yeah. I think as America, that's what we were kind of known for. We would have kept this country going. I mean, the alternative is, realistically, we can't stay shuttered in every time something blows through. I mean, swine flu was worse, and it didn't like ruin our hospital system. So I have a lot of questions. I think we don't trust the news. We don't trust what we see. We don't trust what we're being told. They blame COVID deaths on everything. Like, you get hit by a car, but if you tested for it, they're going to put it down because they want that, that inflated thing. So there's a lot of concern. I think we should open up. I think if you're sick and you're whatever, stay home. And that would have left more resources for those people, would have left more money. Not everyone would have been on unemployment. We have huge issues here in Nevada. No one can get through unemployment. So they stopped everything, closed all the small businesses, and all the large ones were still open. The construction on the stadium was still going on. And it makes people like, this isn't about health. This is obviously something else going on. As you saw, my governor, Sisolak, he restricted the use of a life-saving drug, probably because Trump said it worked. And it really does work. There's a lot of proof that it works. He restricted it. Why? It wasn't rare. It wasn't expensive. He was worried we were going to hoard it. And then we find out like the prison systems have tons of it. So there's something going on. I see an agenda. I think the Democrats saw an opportunity to instill and push their agendas in a lot of their narratives and to reach for power that they normally, I don't think, would have been brave enough to do. And we're nice. We don't want to kill grandma. We kind of went along with it, but it's been long enough. We need to open back up. And I think that those of us that are healthy and can do it need to just do that. Make America America again.
But JD, let me just, like, on the swine flu comparison, that this is worse. I mean, that swine flu was worse. I mean, as I recall, we had in the swine flu, I think roughly 12,000 ballpark fatalities. We've had over 35,000 fatalities with COVID-19 in a matter of weeks. From the standpoint of its transmittability and its mortality rates, it is a greater threat. It's the greatest threat public health-wise that we've confronted in our lifetimes. And all of us have an instinct to want to get back to normalcy and to reopen this economy. But I think from a public policy standpoint, and vastly less important, but not, let's be honest, what's considered as well, even from a political standpoint, this president simply absolutely needs to be able to run in 2020, and he needs to be able to represent the American people that he did all of the logical things to contain the magnitude of American deaths from this disease that we did not ask for, we did not invite, and the origins of which I think continue to be very much under scrutiny, debate, and unclear.
So, Mindy?
May I jump in on that? I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think we all know no matter what Trump does, they're going to find a problem with it. When he wanted to close, the travel off from China, they called him xenophobic, they called him racist, and then they complained 1 month later they didn't do enough when really all they were doing was fighting impeachment. If you notice what Trump made it voluntary. He's like, you guys should do this, you should do that. He never once said, you have to close this, you can't do that. That's the choice that Trump gives us as Americans. He will tell us the right thing to do. We will do our best to do it. I did. But at the end of the day, it's still America. You still have our freedom. You can't we should be able to make our own best decisions. And I like that Trump did that. And I think he did the best he could under the circumstances. They were going to hold him liable, but he did react better and quicker than Obama. So that's one thing you can throw into their face. And I think he did the best he could with the situation. And now we need to work on recovery and getting our rights back from the Democrats, because they sure took them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree he really has done an exceptional job. I will go further than that, because I think if you look at that January 31 travel restriction that he put into place against China, which Joe Biden labeled as, I think, xenophobic and racist, it was condemned by every mainstream media outlet, every congressional Democrat. China denounced it as an unfriendly measure, I think they called it. World Health Organization didn't support it. And yet, in retrospect, that was the singular most important and bold initiative that could have been taken to contain the magnitude of this. And while we've lost over 35,000 Americans so far, if Joe Biden had had his way, if congressional Democrats had had their way, if the media had had their way, and that travel restriction had not been put into place pretty early on, January 31, we hadn't lost one life yet, I think, with a handful of cases, that number of lost Americans would be tens of thousands, in my view, greater than what it is today. So he is not receiving the credit that he deserves for the bold leadership he exemplified and the policy he initiated in limiting and stopping the bleeding, which is the obvious first step of just about any crisis.
I think that makes sense. Buzz?
Yeah, let me jump in also. I think it's obvious that the longer the economy stays closed, one party wins and one party loses in November. And that one party that wins, that can catapult from this thing, is going to be the Democrats. And they know the only way that they're going to beat President Trump in November, and the only way that they probably don't lose the House in November, is to have this economy on hold longer than it needs to be. I think we need to. I agree that this is nothing to be. This is not a minor virus. It's causing a lot of stress across the nation. But I also think that it's been overplayed dramatically by the media. It's been overplayed dramatically by Democratic politicians. It's been overplayed so much to the point that we have people who have lost their livelihoods possibly forever. And again, the only party that benefits is the Democrats and not the Republicans. And I'll say one more thing about Trump's message that I think is important to point out, is that Trump is the only optimist here in this entire situation. The Democrats, Pelosi, Schumer, you name it, they are screaming in the newspaper headlines in the New York Times about how terrifying things are right now. Trump is the optimist. American people like optimism. If you're positive and you're running on a positive message, generally speaking, in this country, Americans like that, and Democrats are not doing that. So, but the longer they close this up, the longer that people cannot go back to work, the more that benefits them in November, and they know that's the only card they have to play, and they're playing it.
Oh yes, they are definitely playing it. Which brings us to another card that they're trying to play, and something that Mindy brought up earlier, healthcare. You know, whether it's, I'm a big proponent of the idea, and when I say proponent, let me clarify. I believe that any step towards the left on healthcare at this stage, whether you go with full-blown Medicare for all or Medicare for all who wants it, or Joe Biden's Obamacare 2.0, anytime that you start to head in that direction, it is inevitably going to lead to socialized healthcare. So let's start with Mindy. What is the alternative? I mean, we can't stick with Obamacare, so what do we do?
If I wanted, I'm a healthy individual. I'm 40, sorry. And it would be $300 a month for my healthcare. That's why I don't have it. It doesn't make sense. If I get sick and I have to go to the walk-in, it's probably $100, but that's better than $300 every month. It's just not feasible. I mean, that's a car payment. I think everyone's looking at, should we socialize it? Should we do that? I think, why is it so expensive? I don't know if you've ever been to the hospital. It's like $80 for an aspirin. It's like they're trying to gouge the insurance companies, and the insurance companies are trying to fight paying it, and it makes it a mess. I feel like, what if there's clarification in a whole healthcare system? What if there's more accountability? Why is every commercial for a brand new drug, and the side effects are like huge, and then of course at the end, if you're allergic to this brand new drug you've never heard of, don't take it, and that kind of stuff. And then like every third commercial is suing about a drug that's dangerous. There's something wrong, I think, with the actual healthcare system, just the way the insurance works, just all that stuff. There's something going on. And obviously it's going to have to do with lobbyists and all the things that they do and the drug companies. I think that's where the issue is. It shouldn't be $300 a month. And the reason it is because, bills are really kind of stupid expensive. But you have socialized medicine. There's a reason Canadians come over here. It's better healthcare. It is competitive. But it really shouldn't cost an arm or a leg too. There's got to be a way to cut it through and make it just more affordable. And I think that's really, to me, that's the only issue. It just needs to be a little bit more affordable.
Okay. Buzz, how do you make it more affordable?
Well, I think it needs to be a hybrid. I mean, I think that we can all agree. I think that our medical system needs to be reformed. I think Obama took a way too big bite out of the apple, and we weren't prepared for that, and a lot of us are paying for that in various ways. And I think Minnie's got a good point in terms of big pharma and lobbyists, and the amount of money that some of these companies are making on prescriptions, which is one of the reasons why, quite frankly, we outsourced some of our medications to China, which we're now obviously regretting having done that, because we're looking for the lowest possible bidder. So I think we just encourage the marketplace. I mean, I'm a capitalist, so I think we encourage the marketplace. I think we can look at across the border in Canada and see that their system is not perfect. I know people in Australia have problems with theirs. Sweden. I used to live in Norway. Norway's got socialized medicine, and it doesn't work very well. And the only place you see a lot of these these technological advancements are in the U.S. because there is a profit motive here. So I think it needs a hybrid where we are. The government needs to be involved, I think, in terms of limiting what big pharma can do in terms of price gouging and those kind of things. But it should be open market across state borders is another thing we need to consider. Open this thing up, and I think it's like in California. We let the DMV in California do pretty much just about everything here. And can you imagine a more screwed up system than having the DMV run how you register to vote? And we don't want DMV type medicine in the nation. And I think we're going to get that if we don't go back to capitalist methods.
So, Michael, do we need the DMV fixed like healthcare, or do we care fixed like the DMV? Gosh, such a confusing question. How do we fix healthcare, Michael?
I'm not sure really that I think we could say any DMV in the country is any success story. I think every citizen in every state has got nothing but frustration about the way those are functioning. The broader point that we could ever entrust government exclusively for the provision of healthcare is well made, and that is that net government doesn't do things particularly well. And the one thing that we've learned the hard way through Medicare and Medicaid and the VA, and those are all necessary programs and have worked for beneficiaries. I think we can acknowledge that there's a hybrid of of coverage that needs to be available in this country for people with different means. But the issue is that when you put government exclusively or even predominantly in control of healthcare, the discussion ends up shifting between how do we make healthcare as good as it can possibly be? How do we make it as innovative as we could possibly make it? How can we, be the cutting edge biopharmaceutical and surgical leaders of the next generation, to how do we contain costs? And once you get into that discussion, you end up with rationing and cutbacks in coverage and denials of prior authorizations and cheaper medications that we know are not the most effective necessarily for patients in need. So the answer ultimately, to come back to the broader question, is I think we're now over 10 years into this healthcare debate. And let me just be a little bit self-critical. It's absurd that we do not have a conservative healthcare plan to address the issues of the uninsured in this country. The American people are concerned about the price of healthcare, they're concerned about access to healthcare, and they're concerned about obtaining insurance. We've spent the vast majority of our time pointing out the obvious debacle of Obamacare and the many ways in which it fails those it seeks to assist. And let's be clear, Obamacare isn't even really health insurance. It's like a catastrophic health care plan. Once you get done with the deductibles and the co-pays, you're looking at individuals paying thousands of dollars. When President Trump correctly got rid of the mandate, a good number of people just dropped the plan, which suggests to me they were holding the plan only not to pay the IRS fee. So we are in the position where, and the president said this, we want to be the party of healthcare. Healthcare is important. It's something we want to have policy leadership on. We continue to talk about the fact that there are private sector solutions to these issues. I believe that there are, but it's time for details, and the American people are going to demand that. And I think they're going to demand it in this 2020 election. We need to be able to not stop talking in terms of generalities and general theories, and really get into the issue of, for the, say, low-income American who is working, who is above the Medicaid eligibility threshold, but is working in an employer who does not carry insurance, who cannot currently afford private health care insurance premiums. And these are millions of people that fall in that category. What is the conservative plan for that individual to obtain health coverage and to care for their health care? That question can't be let us think about it, let us research it. It can't be vague. It's got to be very specific, in my view.
I think that's one of the questions that we have to be asking as the American conservative movement, asking not only of policymakers, but also candidates and everybody else. So it makes sense.
And let's be honest. I mean, this is where I'm starting to get a little, I guess, bolder in my message, is that we have had, I don't think I'm exaggerating, hundreds of millions of dollars that have poured into Washington, D.C. organizations who ostensibly had been at work with the best and the brightest on coming up with these plans. We finally get to a point where we predominantly through the Tea Party movement, aligned, a sufficient amount of support against Obamacare, turned the American people's view against it, pointed out all the deficiencies of it, and then we're at a point for what repeal and replace, and we could not get that final John McCain vote, as you can recall, because we didn't have the replacement plan in place. Well, in any other profession, you would go back to the people who were charged with coming up with that replacement plan and say, what have you been doing for the last 10 years? And frankly, you'd get new people.
Yeah, I would be just happy with repeal. But we could talk about healthcare for hours. I know I could. Let's go on to a more serious topic. I'd like to ask this of Buzz. For those who don't know, Buzz was he traveled with the Clintons. He lived in the White House for a time. So I'm going to ask a yes or no question. This is for all three of you, but I want to hear Buzz's answer first. And you can, if you don't know, you can say I don't know. But let's not speculate too much. So Buzz, did Epstein kill himself?
I don't think he did. No.
Okay.
I, I am well versed with all things Bill and Hillary.
Oh, I know, and that's why I want to know. Tell us more.
There's just too much coincidence there. There's a long list of people. Unfortunately, I'm still walking around. I do keep my head on a swivel occasionally, making sure that I don't have the wrong people behind me. But no, I think Epstein was conveniently murdered to protect. And I'm not just saying it's just the Clintons. I'm sure there were other people going to be implicated by Epstein, but that's kind of the way Clintons do business. And it doesn't surprise me that. I mean, I thought of all the prisoners in the country at that given point in time, you would think the guy they would have the closest eyes on it would be Epstein. And
I think their eyes were very close.
Yeah, I just think it was. I don't have any knowledge of that. I mean, I got to the White House right after Vince Foster killed himself. And I never quite understood what was going on there, although I do know all the files that were taken out of Vince Foster's office were in Hillary's and Bill's bedroom for years and years and years. So that's how they do business. It wouldn't surprise me, and I'm highly suspicious that he killed himself.
Well, you heard it here first. And the American conservative movement, straight from Bill and Hillary's bedroom. Michael, did he kill himself?
The big picture point that we need to make is that the people of this country need to have confidence in government and in institutions. And, I also was active during the Vince Foster issue, and, there were a lot of conspiracy theories about the way he was found, about the suicide, about the convenient timing of it. In the case of Epstein, obviously, you had the pushback from the independent autopsy that was done and questions related to that. He did have a previous suicide attempt, which to me is suggestive. But the point is that none of us should be put into the position of having to speculate. And I agree completely. He was supposed to be under suicide watch. Why was he not under suicide watch? Why were the cameras not working? Where are we with the FBI investigation into this? I mean, government, whether it's being run by Democrats, Republicans, or civil servants, needs to be more transparent and more communicative, because the greatest threat to our republic isn't what happened to Epstein, as bad as that is. It is ultimately that the American people lose confidence in their government, as they have in more autocratic and totalitarian societies where they almost don't even listen any longer to what the government has to say. Right now, for instance, this government is asking 300 million plus Americans to listen to their guidance. Well, they have to have the credibility to be able to speak with authority. And incidents like this, which are justifiable questions and lend themselves to conspiracy theories or alternative facts, however you want to call them, are unhelpful to the functionality of responsive and effective governance. And we've got to, basically put an end to this stuff. And this president, I think, generally has an awareness and recognition of that. And I would hope that, those in this administration do as well. So, for instance, we should be given updates on what the status of this is. We should be given better explanations as to all of these seemingly inconceivable ideas, like the video cameras turning off, the timing of it all, the contradictions on the bruises on his neck, and the fact that vertebrae would or would not have been broken. All these things are ones that, those who didn't witness it, those who aren't expert on it, shouldn't be having to speculate, but we should have confidence in government's explanation that we were not being misled about the reality of the situation.
All right, Mindy?
We know Epstein didn't kill himself. It's not even a conspiracy theory at this point. There's more proof he didn't. I think what people don't know is why wasn't there any accountability? I mean, everything in this world is traceable. If I wanted to knock over a McDonald's, there's going to be a camera that catches. There's going to be something. My phone's going to track it. I don't understand why there was just no accountability. And I think when you do stuff like that, it obviously, first, the joke is, Hillary, what did he have on Hillary, all this stuff. And he did actually have something on Hillary. It anchors the American public. I'm here in Vegas. We had that Route 91 incident. We never really got answers out of that either. There seems to be a darker force in our government. I mean, it's conspiracy theory to call it the deep state, but is it when they're covering for each other, when the DOJ is spying on a presidential candidate and it's still not finding dirt? There's so much wrong. I think we all got carried away thinking Trump would drain the swamp. And then we realized it's an Everglades of just corruption with roots at the highest level that are constantly covering for each other. How do you fix a system when it's the system that would fix it is corrupt itself? So I don't know. I think like most Americans, I'm like, just really, like, we really can't figure this out. I feel like we could if we wanted to, but obviously there's a power above us, that above Trump apparently even, that just can't get to it. And I'm very angry about it. And I think America should just not let down. Bring it up. Even if it's just a joke. Epstein didn't kill himself. Bring it up, because it's an outright just insult to the American people to even think that we think he killed himself.
But JD,
I bring it up on a daily basis.
JD, here's the point. I mean, when I worked in the White House and I came out, you can imagine everybody asks you, like, what's it really like? What were the things you learned from it? Here was always the answer I gave long before I even knew who Epstein was, is that I was amazed how much concern there was within the federal government that the government would lose credibility with the American people, and how much emphasis constructive, positive, good Americans in the administration, how much effort they put into making sure that confidence continued and was not endangered. This government is going to be responsive to those who demand responses. And we have been ill-served over the last few years by a Congress that has not been doing appropriate oversight, and that the oversight that they have been providing has been itself conspiratorial in the case of the Democrats with Russia and Ukraine. So really the answer is, what answers are we going to get? We're going to get the answers that we as a movement and a people demand. And it is a transparent, open government in a functioning constitutional republic. We're entitled to answers on issues of national concern, and we need to demand them, not in fringe ways, not in conspiratorial ways, not in cynical ways. We shouldn't be laughing about any of this. We simply should be insisting on it. And I love the work, for instance, that Judicial Watch has been doing in actually issuing FOIA requests and pursuing these things in a constructive legal way. Because honestly, ultimately, if you're not going to get this done through a democratic political system, that's the only way to obtain this information.
Right.
JD, can I jump in also? I think the American public, by and large, has lost faith in our judicial system. When we had Hillary Clinton, deleting 33,000 emails, classified, a large percentage of those were classified, and then destroying cell phones with hammers and hard drives, and there's no accountability because it's who she knows and what she knows. Her husband meeting Janet Lynch on tarmac in Phoenix, Arizona. Where's the accountability for that? I think people are so ready for the axe to fall on somebody. I keep hoping it's Barr, but and Durham, but I don't know that that's ever going to be the case. And I think most of us, I see it on social media all the time. A lot of Americans are just like fed up. Hey, we can't have a voice, Michael. We can't, our voices are being unheard. We want these people prosecuted, but there's two levels of justice, and it's time for all of us, this movement or candidates or whatever, to say, okay, enough is enough. There's got to be accountability. In the military, there's accountability. I mean, if you screw up in the military, you get kicked out. You get fired, you get kicked out. And a lot of times you go to jail. But there's no accountability in politicians. And I think that's where most Americans look at this and go, yeah. Most Americans are fair. Most Americans understand and get what's lawful and what's unlawful, what's right and what's wrong. And we've had a government I think Michael's right about this, over the last 10, 12 years, we have been ill-served by our process. And I think Americans are getting pissed off. I am. I want to see justice. And I don't know how else we get it. I don't know how we can demand that our leaders do any more than they already have or are willing to do. I think President Trump, with draining the swamp, I think he was on to something. I don't think he had any idea how deep the swamp was. I don't think he had any idea how hard people were going to come after him. The media, the opposition party, all of it. I think he assumed it was going to be bad, but it's really bad. And Washington, D.C. is broken. And I think that's why we need to be focused on as a movement is we've got to fix a lot of things. I mean, California and Nevada are a couple of them, but we got a lot bigger fish to fry in Washington, D.C., and we're not getting it. To date, we're not getting it done.
So I agree with all of that. And I think, as I mentioned in my interview with Jeff, in fact, which I haven't really heard anyone else say, but I'm going to, and hopefully when I present this to all of you guys, you're all going to nod in agreement, and we can get, this to be a collective message, not a Michael Johns message. But I have realized that we have spent now well over a decade complaining about the left's control of the judiciary, the left's control of Congress, the left's control of the media, the left's control of academia. We have spent most of our time complaining. We have not spent most of our time organizing constructive solutions to these problems. And I want to tell you something. I think the American people are getting sick of the complaining. It's only contributing to the partisan divide. If we have solutions to these issues, we need to be presenting them, and we need to be doing it, which is why I really do respect you guys for participating and launching today's conference, and within it implicitly is a recognition that all of us working together toward a common aim are going to be vastly more effective than any one of us will individually, right? So we got just 5 of us here. If each one of us, the 5 of us individually goes out and we all basically try to do the same thing, but we do it individually, that'll have one level effect. If the 5 of us went out and we did it collectively, there would be a multiplier effect in our influence. This is something that the far left has long understood, all the way back to its earliest days. The fact that there needs to be unity, everyone's got to have each other's back, needs to be a singular goal in mind, and you need to be relentless in pursuit of it. That really, when I look to share messaging with grassroots activists of goodwill, that's the biggest message I have, is that look for solutions, work together, and be relentless and supportive of each other. If you do those things, you'd be surprised how many of these things can actually get solved. Because ultimately, this government is only in power because of the will of the people, and they must be responsive to the will of the people, even if that's become increasingly difficult to do as our government's got bigger and our country's gotten bigger.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was our yes or no question. And so that was wonderful stuff, guys.
Yes,
seriously. And
there's how to do it.
Did Epstein kill? See, even from the grave, Epstein is feeling the reach. Let's turn, if we would, to foreign policy. And this is a question for Mindy first, and you guys can chime in as well. But this is something that President Trump had said earlier today during the coronavirus briefing. He said, "I've seen a great disparity in this country. I've seen a very strong anti-Israel bent in Congress with Democrats. It was unthinkable 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, and now they're into a whole different thing between Omar and AOC." So there's birds. Are the Democrats, are they anti-Israel? Mindy.
I saw that too, and I've written a few articles about it. I noticed over the years the left was growing more and more anti-Semitic, and I didn't understand why. Obviously, my previous history was, doing Hollywood movies and stuff like that, and you would never say anything bad about Israel. That's, whatever. But I noticed that even in Hollywood, they were very anti-Israel, and they'll say that's not the same as being anti-Semitic. But then you hear the stuff they're saying, you're like, bro, that's anti-Semitic. Why would they do this? And I think one of the reasons is because I feel like conservatives are pro-Israel in general. Like, I don't believe in sending money to foreign countries unless there's a natural disaster, but I support Israel as one of the best countries in the Middle East, probably the one I would go to if I had to pick. I think, and I think the left became anti-Israel because they had to be pro-Palestine. They had to pick whatever opposite we were. Orthodox Jews, they tend to be conservative. Whereas if you're Jewish and it's just your last name, you tend to be more liberal. At least that's what I noticed in California and Nevada. So I think just to kind of own us, and because we were generally conservative and supportive of Israel, they had to be pro-Palestine. You have 2 pretty much terrorist sympathizing congresswomen. Of course, they're not going to like Israel. And they've said a lot of things that I have no idea how they got away with. But I think it's just to own us. Like, they're like, well, if you guys like Israel, well, then we're going to pick the opposite side just to do it. And I don't understand it. It actually goes against everything the left is supposed to support. If you want to be LGBT and pro-woman, you certainly aren't going to support, a strict Muslim country that's stoning them, setting them on fire, and throwing them off roofs. It should be a conflict, but they don't care. They just want to pick whatever opposite we say. Like, it's the joke. No matter what Trump says, they're going to pick the opposite and run with it. And it's no different, really, when it comes to stuff like this.
Do you guys agree, disagree?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, we support Israel for many reasons. It's the one functioning democracy in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. It is, by and large, an ally. And it has been enormously helpful since its creation in the 1940s to U.S. interests around the world. It's a friend of the United States. It's an ally. But I think it is important to always emphasize we support Israel because it's in our interest to support Israel. We don't just blindly support Israel because we support Israel. We support Israel because that is part of U.S. policy in the region. And, you know, we also need to seize control of the debate. I mean, there is no Palestine. There are regions of Egypt and Jordan that were acquired in conflicts that were launched against Israel. If those territories were going to be given back, as we often hear it generically and generally described, you would give them back to Egypt and you would give them back to Jordan. There's not been an independent functioning state there. So that's a legitimate issue. And let's be honest, we are not dealing with leaders in those two regions who have had much of an interest in peace discussions or in developing the sort of rapport with and respect for this independent nature of the state of Israel that would allow an independent Palestine to develop. So an independent Palestine may indeed one day develop. I think there's a lot of support for that, obviously, in those territories in Gaza and the West Bank, and also in throughout Israel. I mean, even in these elections, you see, and I've been to Israel and I've been to that region repeatedly, a lot of support for an independence, but the conditions for that need to be created. And when you're launching rockets supported by Iran into Israel, attacking civilians and ruthlessly violating the territorial rights of Israel, you're not creating the conditions that really allow for any constructive peace agreement to occur. And I do know this administration would love nothing more than to be a force for constructive good in allowing that to happen. But ultimately, it takes two parties, and I just don't think we have within the purported Palestine leadership the sort of commitment to peace that's necessary for it to occur, at least not today in 2020, maybe at some point.
Buzz?
Well, I've spent years and years and years flying into and out of that region, and so I've been to all these countries on multiple occasions, and I think that the history of Israel is important to understand. And it's also important to understand that, as Michael says, it is in our best interest to be allies, but it's also important to understand that because of the Judeo-Christian ethic that we were founded upon, and Israel obviously was founded upon, we have the most in common with Israel than we do with the rest of the countries. We have a lot of mutual beliefs, a lot of mutual principles and value systems, and I think it makes us friendly based on the fact that we do have some common values. And I think if we're talking about Israel also, we need to talk about what's happening right now in the region. I think is it's important to understand what happened in 1979. In 1979, there were three really critical things that happened. Saddam Hussein killed his uncle and assumed the presidency in Iraq. The Ayatollah Khomeini the Iranians overthrew the Shah and propped up the Ayatollah Khomeini with Jimmy Carter's support, by the way, which I think was very essential to understand. And then in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabists stormed Mecca and took it over and forced the House of Saud to be much more hard stream Sharia law than they were previous to that. So in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, this all kind of came to a head, and we're still later, 40, 50 years later, we're still reaping the fruits, so to speak, of what happened in that year. And the only only saving grace and the only thing that we have in common with that region, with the exception of oil and money coming from Saudi Arabia and other places, is the fact that we have mutual interests and our backgrounds with Israel. And I think that we have to be pro-Israel. I've always wondered, Mindy, I live just north of Hollywood, and I've always wondered why the Jewish, the Hollywood Jews are so dismissive of Israel and so supportive of Palestine. I've always wondered why all that money goes not to their homeland, but it goes to the arch enemy of Israel in the PLO. And I just think it's amazing to me that they're. I spoke to the Jewish Republican Alliance not too long ago, mostly conservatives, but they're rare in Hollywood. And I asked that same question, and the answer I got is mostly it's guilt. It's elitist money guilt on the part of the Jews in Hollywood and Los Angeles. I find that to be fascinating because you would think about them supporting their homeland, but they don't.
Mindy, please.
Okay, so you remember when there was a protest against Ilhan Omar because she was supporting CARE, and it was in, I believe, your neck of the woods. I was there. I was right there, and I would say it was about half patriots and half Jewish Americans. To explain the difference between why one would be so I'm Irish Catholic. Now you can be Irish American, but not necessarily believe in God. You could be an atheist. You could be a lot of things. It's just in name. But if you're Irish Catholic, you tend to be more conservative. You're going to have that Judeo-Christo background. You're going to have grown up with it. It's just a split somewhere where, it's a religion and an ethnicity. And if you're religious, you tend to be conservative. And if you're just hanging out with the last name, Mick whatever, Irish, doesn't make you Catholic. So I think that's the split. And there are a lot of, it was half and half that day. It was a beautiful thing. It was either an Israeli flag, American, or both, which I love. And you're right. It's the only country I have rights in the Middle East. So of course I'm going to support it.
Well, that concludes the Hollywood Jews segment of this discussion.
That sounds awful.
JD, it is important, and I think that all of you.
It is.
I think all of you share this concern, though. If you actually were going to look at the Christian presence in that region, and obviously the persecution of Christians around the world is a major issue, and it's particularly an issue in the Middle East. Actually, I could name, I think, at least 4 or 5 countries that have a larger Christian population than Israel. Jordan, Egypt, Iran itself, Syria, Lebanon. These have very strong Christian populations that are facing increased levels of oppression and repression. So the prospect, this idea that our relationship with countries is to some extent influenced by cultural or religious phenomenons. Obviously, there's many factors that go into our relationship with foreign countries. But I believe the prospect for enhanced relationships with that region of the world actually does exist. And I do believe there's aspirations for democratic political governance. We're seeing it manifest in Iran. We've seen it manifest in Egypt. We've seen it manifest in increasingly with some of the constructive steps that are taking in the liberalization in Saudi Arabia. We need to be, I think, open-minded about expanded relationships, not just with governments, but with the people of the purported Arab world, and seeking constructive reforms in those areas. The people of Iran, not the government of Iran, but the people of Iran are hugely pro-American, and I don't think there would be a singular more constructive step that could be taken for the interests of peace and stability in that region than to see democratic political change ultimately come to Iran. That falls on Iranians, not Americans, to help materially develop. But what a constructive development that would actually be.
Very well said.
Absolutely. So let's cut to I guess you could call it sort of a lightning round of questions, because just looking in the chat, there's about 30 of them left, and we've got about 9 minutes. So please limit your question or your answers to 14 words. No, I'm just kidding. Just try to keep them short if you can. please. Let's start with one that there was a debate, and I'm going to have to go back through the chat and read it because it looked pretty lively. Convention of States, Article 5. Yay or nay?
The what?
The Convention of States, Article 5, Convention of States, in which we go through and pick out amendments, push a balanced budget amendment, hopefully get rid of the 17th Amendment. Let me just give some background for everybody. The proponents, conservative proponents of the Convention of States, basically say that there's a lot that needs to be fixed. We need a balanced budget amendment. Otherwise, Congress is never going to limit itself. We need to consider getting rid of the 17th Amendment and have state legislators decide senators once again. There's a few other things that are on the various proposals. Mark Levin has been pushing for a while. It's been, you've got Mark Meckler and people like that. So just briefly, and if you don't want to answer, I understand, because it is a polarizing issue. And just as I say, to keep the answer short, I made the question long. So let's start with Buzz. Should we look into it or should we avoid it like the plague?
No, you know what? I would say right now in the current environment in this nation, it's not a good idea. I can certainly see it in the future. I just don't think that we need that at this point in time. I mean, I hate to be the politician here and kick the can, but I'm going to do it in this case.
Actually, we do hope that you become the politician. That's why we're supporting you for California 7 in November. All right, Michael.
I agree. I don't think that I'm pleased that I'm not the only voice on this against the Convention of States. But let me just say, I don't think it's been properly considered by most conservatives that when you open a Convention of States, it's not just going to be open to conservative amendments to our Constitution. It's going to be open to liberal amendments to the Constitution. So, you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, Convention of States. That's the way to do it. And let me just say, there's a lot of popular momentum behind that. Additionally, let me just say, we are not enforcing the Constitution as it exists. This idea that we're going to put in additional amendments that somehow are going to be transformative in American politics is absurd. The Second Amendment couldn't be more clear-cut, yet we see the Second Amendment eroded and discarded every day and upheld in courts of law across this country. We need to adhere to the Constitution as it exists currently, enforce the Constitution, and elect political leaders who are committed to it.
Yeah.
Mindy.
I'll make it easy. I'm not familiar enough with it to actually comment. I actually have to look at this. I haven't really had this across my table yet. So there's your final.
Well, it's never happened before. No, that's great. It's never happened before.
Unless I know. So
it's a portion of the Constitution that basically allows for amendments. We've seen amendments before. They've happened through Capitol Hill. But the alternative way to make that happen is through the states. You need a supermajority of states to approve it, and then they send delegates to a convention. The long story short is, to Michael's point, there is a very great risk, and this is what the opponents of it usually say, is that you'll have what's quote-unquote called a runaway convention. Now, with that said, as I established earlier, I am the Federalist, the far right winger. I'm all for it, but it's a tough call, and I don't hold anybody at fault for not wanting to go down that road, because it can be terrifying. I would just like to see it, at least sometime in my lifetime. It would be a lot of fun, guys, tons of fun.
We gotta fix our election system before we try to do anything else. I mean, let's keep it real.
True.
There's voter fraud everywhere, that they're cheating to win. I live in the reddest state ever, and it's blue. I don't trust that power right now.
All right.
We're gonna fix our elections, honestly, before we even think of messing with some more serious stuff.
Okay, so that's a great next question, again with short answers. What is the greatest risk to the election system this time? I'm not talking about in general. I'm talking about this November. We've got voter fraud. We've got mainstream media, their whole thing. You have the Democrats who are so terrified that the voters are going to get too involved in the election and actually influence it. That was a joke. Voters influence. What are the big threats to the election? What is the biggest? Buzz.
Well, it's definitely in California, voter fraud and ballot harvesting. Two things that should never be allowed to happen. But we have 128% registered eligible voters in LA County, for example, there's something wrong. And I know that the Republican Party in California is trying to address that. Hopefully we get there by November. We have some plans to do our own efforts in that regard, not fraudulent efforts, but to do some harvesting ourselves as long as it's legal in California. And surprisingly, that idea came from Arnold Schwarzenegger, the ballot harvesting thing, which was the worst thing to happen to California politics probably ever.
Okay. Mindy?
Well, I think my next panel coming up is all about the election in Nevada. I've looked into a lot of it. It's a lot of fraud. Right now, I don't need an ID to vote. I don't need an ID to register. I don't need to prove anything. Illegal aliens can get a driver's license. I just looked that up today. I couldn't believe it. Oh, and if you register for a driver's license, you're automatically signed up to vote unless you opt out of it. You can do same day signing up. It's so crooked. And to be at these rallies and to hear first person accounts of busloads of people from California showing up and voting. Now they're suing us because they do want ballot harvesting, and they don't even want to match signatures. It's bad enough you don't need an ID. They don't even want to match signatures when it comes close. The ballot harvesting is a big issue, and I appreciate what Buzz is doing. People are like, well, why don't you guys just ballot harvest? Conservatives aren't like that. We actually believe in the electoral system. I don't trust some person at my door with my personal information and my vote. I just don't. If I really believe in it, I'm going to go out and vote or do the mail-in. And so it just doesn't work. So ballot harvesting is inherently going to lean left. It's just, they're just basically going to hand in all the votes until they need them. And the way it's set up right now, I feel like the Democrats know they cannot win in November. They know. So they're going to do everything they can to just take it.
Mm-hmm. Mike, you've got 1 minute.
I generally agree. I think voter fraud is probably the biggest issue. I think this president, before the coronavirus showed that he was executing on his record, he was going to, I think, poised for re-election on that alone, on the state of the economy. And then I was concerned, but now I'm much less concerned because I think even if this is a referendum on the management of the coronavirus epidemic, the travel restriction I mentioned earlier that he put in place versus Biden's ridiculous opposition to it alone shows that he's not a compelling candidate in my judgment or in the judgment of many. So I think it's really the issue of can we have an honest election? And the other final point would be the issue of mail-in ballots are very concerning to me if this is still lingering around. That's been an area where there's been even broader fraud than the traditional polling place voting.
Absolutely. I'll if they have mail-in voting, I'll vote for Mindy. So from California, yeah. So one last question, and this is one that's probably going to be controversial. And again, we're down to very little time. Stick around if you guys are, because we're going to go straight into the next session, which I'm not sure who it is, but I heard that she's pretty good at this stuff. Oh yeah, it's Mindy. Sorry, my jokes are not landing at all today. So
people laughing at home.
They're laughing to themselves at me. So the last question. We just had a $2 trillion quote unquote bailout. Do we oppose? And I'm going to load this question. Do we adamantly and dramatically and unequivocally oppose the next $2 to $3 trillion bailout that is proposed on Capitol Hill, or do we just say, why not? Let's go with modern monetary theory. 30 seconds each. Go. Somebody jump.
Well, I'm impressed that you know modern monetary theory. Let me start by that. That's an important theory to understand, and I wish conservatives understood a little better. I do believe that, look, you cannot put this economy into the state that it's in and deny it the liquidity that it needs to function and simply expect that there's some libertarian free market solution that's going to emerge. We would lose these industries. Foreign countries would gain market share. They would ultimately have to, if they were ever going to be resuscitated and run by government. So in essence, I don't call this a bailout, that most of it was loans. And the next package we're looking at, I believe, will be predominantly infrastructure, I hope. And let's remember, President Trump ran on a commitment and a promise to get infrastructure done in this country. Now is the time to do it. We've got millions of Americans out of work. We have decaying infrastructure all over the country. We're not competing fairly with other countries of the world. Our infrastructure should match our purported statement of greatness, and it doesn't currently. Now is the time to do that. it's not, none of these programs are going to be perfect. You can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. But we would not get through this without a federal government and without an engaged federal government addressing particularly the liquidity issues in every aspect of this economy: personal, small business, big business, banks. That all ultimately in a fiat currency system, money only comes from one place, and that's our federal government. We haven't yet developed an alternative.
I must say, just very succinctly, I agree with everything Michael just said. And I am also of the mind. I'm really happy for this conference and the fact that we have conservatives now. They're going to be punching back again. Let's not be polite, sit in our hands, conservatives. Let's be in your face, punch back, conservatives. I'm really proud to be part of this.
Mindy, do you want to pick that answer up on yours, or do you want to give us a 30?
I'll give you a really quick answer. I'd have to see what's in it, and man, I can't wait to see what's in it this time. Right? What do you think? What do you think they're going to try to pad it with this time? It's absolutely obscene. They did the biggest disservice to themselves. There was the biggest pro-Trump campaign they could have done, was stuff that stimulus bill that was supposed to help us with that kind of pork.
That's ridiculous. That's absolutely. Guys, thank you so much for attending and for speaking and brilliance. And I do agree with Michael that, hey, check out Modern Monetary Theory. Become aware of it because it is coming your way.